Hi everyone, welcome to SCHA Orientation 2020. This is the workshop on economic justice, and my name's Frey, and I live at DSC. Let's get started. So, defining economic justice is an important step to understanding it. And I know this seems like a big wall of text, but we'll dissect it in a little bit. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and read it to contextualize our conversation. So economic justice, which touches the individual person as well as the social order, encompasses the moral principles which guide us in designing our economic institutions. These institutions determine how each person earns a living, enters into contracts, exchanges goods and services with others, and otherwise produces an independent material foundation for their economic sustenance. The ultimate purpose of economic justice is to free each person to engage creatively in the unlimited work beyond economics, that of the mind and spirit. Yeah, so it does seem like a lot, but we'll go into it a little bit more. So I guess before we start to construct the meaning of economic justice, we need to understand the system in which we live in and the contradictions within that system that don't allow for economic justice to be the norm and for there to be a lot of inequity within economics. So within capitalism, we see that capital equals power. And we can see that simply in the top right graph here. So less than 1% or 1% of the US population are millionaires. Yet we see a much higher representation of people with this extreme capital within places of power, such as Congress. We also see that a lot of homes remain vacant, and a lot of single individuals or single families own homes in excess and prevent people from being able to live, especially within highly populated urban centers that are experiencing gentrification. A lot of vacant homes remain, and there is not enough resources for folks who don't have a home to be able to get into that market. And there's a lot of inequality within that. Your connections and your credit score and all of these different variables influence your ability to either buy or rent a home. And if a person doesn't have these connections, this generational wealth, then it becomes very difficult for folks to own or even rent or have a place to live. So that unequal access is a huge part of economic justice and why we do this work. In the middle left here, we can see there's a map of the US, and these darker areas represent a higher percent rise in the poverty rate. And these areas, again, are the main places being heavily gentrified. Capital is being poured into these places, and the cost of living is going up, and the cost of property tax is going up. And these places are less and less hospitable to folks without a lot of money, to the working class, to those in poverty or near poor. And that's a huge part of our community and our population. Another part of that is wage stagnation. There's a disconnect between the amount of labor that people are doing versus how much they're making over time. And as we move forward, especially within an economic crisis like pandemic, we see this more and more where the cost of living is rising, but the wages aren't going up. Another thing that is a bizarre contradiction is how our carceral system works, and how the US has a much higher percentage of incarcerated people than the rest of the world. And this has a lot to do with a for-profit prison system and the labor that is taken from these people that are incarcerated, while they're also paid very little to no money for their labor, which is often hazardous and dangerous and life-threatening. And the last thing I'll touch on in this little infographic here is how our tax dollars are distributed. A lot of the time, people who earn $1 million, or people who have a lot of resources, finally polls that aren't taxed as heavily as a working class person. And then another contradiction is that wealth is distributed back into our racist prison system and into the defense budget. And I use defense very loosely because this budget causes a lot of harm to people, both overseas and in our own communities, in our own spaces. And that includes the police budget. And those dollars are spent there rather than working towards a more equitable medical system, housing, and education system. And this is another graph that goes a little bit more in depth into the consequences of incarceration and imprisonment. And folks who have been incarcerated earn far, far less than those who have not been incarcerated in their same demographics. And we also see here that there is a huge disparity between race and ethnic groups as well. So that's institutional racism at work there and white supremacy. And another thing that I'll touch on, apologies if this infographic is so small, but the school to prison pipeline is a huge component of our prison industrial complex, and how schools are essentially built around keeping the labor force within prisons stable and profitable. And this is an incredibly racist system. And the funding that's provided to schools is very inequitable, and communities of color are much more likely to be affected by this system. Another fallacy within capitalism is the bootstrap theory. For those that aren't familiar with this theory, it's that a lot of people, a great majority of people, think that someone can just pick themselves up by the bootstraps and be able to live a profitable life based off their labor. But this is a fallacy because folks don't have the same opportunities to be able to do this. A lot of people have this generational wealth that's accumulated over many years and many lifetimes, and have a lot more economic mobility than folks who have been othered and created, and it's been built into the system to oppress certain groups of people, including Black and Indigenous people of color. So we need to reject this theory and understand that the main avenue for community support is within collectivizing and creating a horizontal structure of support. So this is a question where you can go ahead and pause and talk with your communities. How does internalized capitalism affect our communities? And this, this can be at the house level, at CHA level, within Davis, outside of Davis, whatever scale that you want. You can go ahead and talk about this, and we'll go ahead and pause here for a second.